The house smelled like rosemary and lemon. The way my mother liked it when she wanted dinner to feel ceremonial. Candles were lit even though it was still light out. My son, Ethan, sat with his back straight, knees tucked in, eyes flicking between the serving bowls and his grandparents' faces. He'd worn his good sweater without being asked. He'd worked for weeks on his science fair project. Not the kind of weeks adults remember fondly, but the real kind. Scraped knuckles from rewiring a cheap sensor kit, pages torn out and rewritten, a small, persistent frustration that never turned into quitting. He didn't talk about it much at dinner. He waited. My parents asked about school. They asked about my nephew's soccer tournament. They asked about the weather. When the conversation finally reached the science fair, it was my mother who smiled and said, show us. Ethan slid his tree, fold board forward. He explained carefully, as if he were afraid of spilling something. His project was about water filtration. Low-cost materials, a tweak on an existing method. Nothing flashy. He'd tested it, recorded it, tested it again. He explained why it mattered where we lived, why small changes could make a difference. My father nodded. My mother tilted her head. That's cute, she said. You're very thorough. Then she turned to my sister's son and asked him to explain his idea again. He talked fast, confident, about an app concept that would disrupt. Something vague. My parents leaned in. Questions came sharper, more interested. My father laughed at the right places. When dessert arrived, my mother reached into her bag and produced a check. She said it like it was a blessing. This is for your future startup, she told my nephew, sliding the check across the table. 10,000, we believe in investing early. The room shifted, chairs creaked. Ethan's hands folded together so tightly his knuckles went white. He didn't look at me. He stared at the tablecloth. I noticed the way my mother avoided looking at him. I didn't say anything right away. I took a sip of water. I let the moment settle. Because moments like that always want you to rush them. To say the wrong thing so they can dismiss you as emotional. I thought about the nights Ethan had come to me with a notebook full of questions. About how he'd asked if it was okay that his idea wasn't big. About how I'd told him that careful work mattered, even when it wasn't loud. I stood up. I smiled because smiling kept my voice steady. That's very generous, I said, truly. Before you finalize anything though, there's something you should know about Ethan's project. My parents looked at me, surprised but not alarmed. The check was still on the table. Last month, I continued, his school nominated his project for a regional research incubator. It's not a prize, more like oversight. They require formal documentation. Consent forms. Intellectual property agreements. My father frowned slightly. What does that mean? He asked. It means, I said, that Ethan's work is already under review by the district's academic board. They filed a provisional educational patent on his behalf. Not for profit, but to protect the methodology. Any private funding would have to be disclosed and approved. Cash gifts tied to commercialization would violate the agreement. Silence. Thick, unmistakable. My mother's hand hovered over her wineglass. My sister looked from the check to my parents, then to Ethan, as if trying to recalculate the room. I'm sure it's all very academic. My mother said slowly. It is, I agreed. Which is why I wanted to thank you before saying this part. That check can't be accepted for a startup. If you'd like to support Ethan, the incubator accepts donations to its general fund. Otherwise, it would need to be returned. My parents' faces drained of color, not dramatically, but unmistakably. Authority had entered the room, not in uniform, not with raised voices, but with paperwork and consequences. Something they respected. Ethan finally looked up at me. Not smiling, just steady. Well, my father said after a moment, clearing his throat. That complicates things. It protects things, I said. That was the point. No one argued. No one apologized. The check sat there suddenly. Dinner ended early. Later that night, Ethan sat on his bed, his board propped against the wall. He asked, quietly, if he'd done something wrong. No, I told him. You did something careful. He nodded, thinking. Kids are better at holding unresolved things than adults think. My parents didn't call for a few days. When they did, they asked about the incubator. They asked about the forms. They didn't mention the check. Favoritism doesn't disappear in a single evening. But that night, at that table, it lost its grip, not loudly, not triumphantly, just enough